I'm just, got my headphones on.
Yeah,
That's
from
all.
right from this point, I'll start recording right now. I wasn't
Okay,
recording
okay.
at first, yeah.
All right.
But like I said, if you got any questions, I'll just reiterate something at this point because now I'm recording. If you want me to, is there anything else?
Yeah, I had stepped in, but I wanted to ask, so you saying that pretty much everything that these people took from us and they trying to make it a secret society and all that good stuff, like you're saying pretty much like these people been lying to us for a very, very long time.
No, yeah, that'll sum it up. That'll definitely sum it up. And just knowing this information, because remember, why are we learning this information? It's so we can put our people on and talk in a way that's very rational, intellectual. We're not attacking their religion. We're not coming like we just smarter than them and like we trying to sun them and belittle people. We're just downloading the law and history, how everything went down, so we can relay this information. So not only or did they lie to us, when you explain this to somebody, you let them know when you're looking at Freemasonry, you're looking at more science um, through signs and symbols, right? So when George Washington is standing on the checkerboard floor, we know that's hex alpha. We know that's as above, so below. We know that's opposites attract, right? We know that creates harmony because when you look in cosmology, for example, I'm a Virgo, so my 180-degree opposite would be Pisces, which would put you in the natural order of things, right? Because the water sign and the earth sign is two different aspects of tendencies, right? Earth sign more logical, water sign more intuitive. So I just went into depth on what this man is standing on right now. So if you can explain something like that to a person versus just getting caught up in the, oh, the president was Masons. It's like all this conspiracy type of stuff like that. That's a waste of time. Getting caught up in that. We want to find savvy ways on how to unite our people with this truth, right? So hopefully that makes sense what I just said. Somebody said something in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah.
Somebody said something.
No, I was saying I understand. That's all.
Okay, yeah, Islam. Islam. Tazamaji got in the chat. Right, knowing self and our royal history, we see all the riches they took from us. Right, all this stuff becomes apparent now. So that is a bigger picture than what was told. So now transitioning to classifications of law. In order to grasp an understanding on what laws are and how they work, we must cover a few classifications of law. Private law. As used in contradiction to public law, the term means all that part of the law which is administered between citizens and citizen, or which is concerned with the definition, regulation, and enforcement of rights in cases where both persons in whom rights adheres and the person upon whom the obligation is intent are private individuals. An example of this would be an agreement between you and another person in the form of a written contract. Within the contract, it may contain information on what you can and or cannot do. For example, if I establish a trust contract with you, so when we're saying trust, what are we saying? And it's not the context of what I'm about to read, but I'm just stopping for a minute and explaining what a trust is. A simple trust, three parties, typically grantor, trustee, beneficiary. Something is being held for the benefit of another, property, etc. And that's a contract. All right, so I'm gonna continue. Oh, no, before I continue, and you also have community trust, like I always bring up. how these Asians work together, the Vietnamese, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, etc. And they got these communities, Chinatown, Koreatown. They have what you call community trust, which is the same principle. You got the beneficiaries, which are their people at large in that area. They elected somebody to do X, Y, Z, to administrate businesses, do negotiations, whoever the most savvy people in their community for the benefit of their people. That's a contract, and that's protected and insulated. Probate court can't mess with that. Municipal judges can't mess with that. That's self-sustaining. That's sovereignty. Why? Because whatever was decided on by the people, that's where the term "we the people" truly comes from. When you hear the term "we the people," that's a trust expression. That's an expression of trust law. Why? Because we the people have sovereignty and power, but you only have sovereignty and power when the people are competent, are in honor, invoking divine law to even be a party to the Constitution, to become a people. Because you're 3/5. Remember, you're 3/5 of a human. If you don't know your nationality and religion, went over that last week. So you're not considered human. You're not considered a people. You're considered a ward and chattel property. So that we the people trust law don't apply to minority people that identify as minorities. They don't honor their ancestors. They don't work together. They don't know their nationality. They arguing over stuff that don't matter. You're not a party to we the people. All right. So I know I'm saying a lot, but things are coming to my mind as I'm reading this, and it's all relevant. So I'm gonna continue. A trust contract with you and designates you as the administrator in the contract. I grant you the power to regulate who was allowed to use one of my 3 cars while I'm on vacation. Let's say it's a Honda, a BMW, or a Nissan. If in the contract I permit you only allow my wife to use the BMW, then that would be the private law of the contract. As an example, to which the laws of this contract can only be enforced between the parties in the agreement, i.e., you and me. The laws of that contract state that my wife is only allowed to use one of my 3 cars. So that example is law. If people die off and whatever the case may be, it's a dispute between family members. It goes to these municipal colonist courts. All the municipal administrators are gonna say, "Oh, it's already been decided on where this stuff goes." But if these things are not intact, now the bar members and these foreigners get an interest in your estate. Your grandma might have had a property that's great grandma left it in the family, and it get lost because the heirs, people that are supposed to be heirs, aren't competent, or the great grandma didn't even know trust law herself to even pass it down properly. Right. So this is back to, these are really ABCs that our people supposed to know. This is what you call civics, jurisprudence. All right. And this is the importance of nationality in law, which determines your political status, which we went over last week. All right. And signify that you have allegiance to your people. You're invoking divine law. You're in a whole different space now, because it's never been we've been attacked because of the color of our skin. Because of course we got people coming from the east that are darker than us. They just turban, fez. They doing very well. It's their mentality, their character. They work together. They're on a whole different wave. So we're not being oppressed for the color of our skin. That's a Freemasonic situation too, to promote that in the news like that. Another example would be company policy. Let's say the CEO of McDonald's issues an executive order and states all employees must wear red hats as a part of their uniform. That would be private corporate law for that corporation only, and would have effect any other person. So if you're not part of McDonald's, that law don't apply to you. Think about if somebody from McDonald's told you, they pull up to your house, you got to wear this red hat. You're gonna be looking at them crazy, right? You're gonna be looking at them real crazy. So follow where I'm going with this. It's gonna make sense as we continue. An example of who the executive order wouldn't affect is a customer, just the employees, right? That law of wearing a red hat only affects the employees. An employee of McDonald's would be considered by law obligated to abide by any executive orders issued by the CEO or any other person in position to create laws for the corporation based on the employer-employee contract agreement that they entered into. The same applies to the above examples regarding the trust contract. The law's rules would only apply to the parties signed into the agreement, thus making it private. Any questions on private law before we transition to commercial law? Also in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, it talks about no obligation shall be placed on contracts. What that means is that's the law. The contract is the law. And let me just pull it up on the screen so everybody can just get a visual of what I'm saying as far as the Constitution. So Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution states that is not allowed to pass any law that impairs the obligation on contracts. This is what I'm referring to. The clause was initially meant to prevent state legislation that retroactively changed the terms of private contracts. So a contract supersedes any municipal law, the municipal corporate state. That's why it's private. I wanted to throw that in there too on why contracts are private and the power of contracts, and that a trust is simply a contract. Transitioning to commercial law. A phrase used to designate the whole body of substantive jurisprudence, and jurisprudence is the science of law, the science of political status, citizenship, all of the above. Applicable to the rights, intercourse, and relations of persons engaged in commerce, trade, and mercantile pursuits. It is not a very scientific or accurate term, as foreign commerce is carried on by means of shipping. The term has came to be used occasionally as synonymous with maritime law, but in strictness, the phrase commercial law is wider and includes many transactions or legal questions, which have nothing to do with shipping or incidents. So we're dealing with commercial law, we're dealing with goods, products, cattle, chattel. Commercial law are the rules used to regulate how business, trade, trafficking, and mercantile pursuits are handled as a guideline to protect the persons involved as well as the public. An example of this would be security guard who works for a jewelry shop. Although it is the natural right of the people to keep and bear arms supported by the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights, or the Second Bill of Law, Bill of Rights, it is mandatory, imperative, and necessary in commercial activity for any person hired in a commercial capacity to have proper training, mental screening conducted, as well as a license as a public safety requirement. The agent and the principal are responsible for any torts in regard to the common people, making it easier not only to protect the people, but to hold the person, agent, and corporation responsible, liable to provide appropriate remedy or recourse to any injured parties. Hence, the reason most States of the Union require bonds. Commercial law can also be viewed as private contracts. So you got private law, you got commercial law, and the slight differences between both. If there's no questions on commercial law, I'm going to transition to public law. Public law that
I had a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I got you on my episodes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So saying if like I'm in all bear arms, right? And you said that's in the bill of law, right? So like when they say license, you don't really need a license to carry arms if if you're on your own land. Am I correct or no?
Right. So the Second Amendment says
my main question is like what my bad. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. You got the right to bear arms to secure a free state. Like I was covering last week. Back to what is the intent? Where's your mind state? Where your status? Because your mind state determines your status, like what you know, how you moving, right? So the Second Amendment, what does it say? You have the right to bear arms to secure a free state. It doesn't just say you got the right to bear arms. So now what is a free state, right? I think we all, matter of fact, let's just for repetition purposes, let's just go through this again. Just so we be competent. Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people, that's why I brought up the people. I know you came in a little late. I'm not sure if you heard the demonstration about we the people. What qualifies you to be even considered people and not 3/5? Knowing your religion, nationality, now you're a people. Also, it signifies a free state. Now, for repetition, we went over this again. Let me see the chat. The mess of the Constitution, they give you rights at the federal level, then revoke or restrict them at the state level. Which is true. Brother Gary put that in the chat. And the reason they do that is because when you're dealing with non-U.S. citizens, it's always federal. State jurisdiction don't apply to certain people, certain statuses.
Yep, exactly.
You know what I mean? That's private. That's why I went into commercial law, because when you let's talk about, for instance, the city of whatever. When you go to the city hall of that municipality and look up the city of Los Angeles, city of whatever they call them, the city of whatever, you're gonna see it's called a municipal corporation. They have bylaws, they got board members, and that's why we gave the example about McDonald's. You're gonna be looking crazy if a McDonald's board member comes to your house talking about you got to wear a red hat, and you're not even part of that board that had that agreement to do that. That only applies to the employees. It's the same principle with these municipal corporations. They're gonna say doing business as the city of whatever. That is a corporation that has internal members. The only reason a person will be subject to those rules and regulations of a corporate institution is if you're not people. You become so wards of the state, minorities, stateless people, they're being regulated by these municipalities for lack of knowledge, because they're not doing it for themselves. They're just beggars. They're going to the government looking for them to do everything for us, rather than we doing it for ourselves intellectually.
I get it.
You know what I'm saying? So now let's utilize that and tie this back to the Second Amendment. Now, who's a party to the Second Amendment? People with nationalities and organized communities. That's what a free state is. Let's go back to the law dictionary. Let's go back to the law dictionary here. Let's look up state. Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. A people permanently occupying a fixed territory bound together by common law. What's common law? International law, constitution, treaties, habits, and customs. So that body has traditions, right? And so one body politic exercising through the medium of an organized government, independent sovereignty and control over all persons and things within its boundaries, capable of making war and peace. For the reason we're capable of making war is because we got the right to bear arms, because we're a free state, right? That's the element of the Second Amendment, right? It's not just the right to bear arms, but the right to bear arms to secure a what? A free state. And what is a state? It's just simply a community of people that share the same nationality. They got businesses, schools, they moving, they stuff in trust, so which means the fact that it's a community trust is insulated from the corporate state anyway. That's why I read you the Constitution of the contract, because the trust is just a contract. It's just a community contract amongst the people. That's the phrase, we the people. Now, if people have got this type of mind state working with each other, that's a whole nother status. That's why we're talking about status. Now let's go back to nationality. Nationality, that quality or character. Character is one of the elements of nationality. The quality or character which arises from the fact of a person belonging to a nation, root word for nationality is nation, or state. We just read state. All right, so nationality and organization. Nationality determines your political status. Why? Because your mind is working different. You don't got the Negro behavior. You know your culture and history. And because of that, you have pride. And because of that, you work together today in real time. Because of that, you distinguish yourself from people that don't have nationality, especially with reference to allegiance. Allegiance is an aspect of somebody having a nationality. They have allegiance to a bloodline. They honor their ancestors, and that determines your political status. All right. So if it determines your political status, let's once again, repetition. What is status? What is status? Your standing, state, or condition. The legal relation of individual to the rest of the community. Your duties, capacities, and incapacities, which means rights you have or you don't have, and determines a person to a given class. What it also means is state, because it talks about if you can really own property or not. That's why I went into the community trust, right? Because property can't own property. If you're not part of the we the people, if you don't qualify to be a people, that means your status is minority, ward of the state, your property. Property can't own a state. They can have mortgages though. They can have mortgages. All right. But when you have an estate, that means that's part of your family's stuff that gets passed down, as long as the people stay competent on how to administrate the estate. All right. So that's why nationality determines your status. That's why your status determines what position you have with property. Any questions?
No, not at all. You covered everything. I appreciate that.
Yeah, let me see. Public law. That branch or department of law which is concerned with the state in its political or sovereign capacity, including constitutional and administrative law, and with the definition, regulation, and enforcement of rights in cases where the state is regarded as the subject of the right or public object of the duty, including criminal law and criminal procedure, and the law of the state considered in its quasi-private personality. Now, quasi means fake. So in this case, we're talking about the corporate state, like the state of California, the state of whatever, and this, the subsidiaries or the cities of or whatever. So that's a quasi-private personality, a public law. That's statutes, ordinances, codes, penal codes, etc. That's all right. So as capable of holding and exercising rights or acquiring or dealing with property in the character of an individual. So the corporate state, that's why the DAs would be like, I'm representing the people. The district attorney that's representing the municipal state, they're representing the municipal corporation and their board members, but they're not representing the people as far as how they're trying to pass it off. So that's, we'll learn in law that you can't injure a piece of paper, a corporate filing. Anybody can start a corporation, and you can look up, go to the city hall, look them up. Like, oh, they got bylaws. Okay, but you can't injure a piece of paper. So if you get a ticket or something, and no human being was like, oh, I got injured, and then the DA is talking about I'm representing the people in this matter of whoop-de-whoop, that's how you slice and dice that fraud in court, open court. And that shows you how they fraud you as far as taking advantage of our people not knowing this information. Because this is basics. There's not nothing even too far fetched. The definition of public law is very broad, but an example of public law will be any of the Bill of Rights. Considering the Bill of Rights is part of the Constitution and it being the supreme law of the land, it therefore is public law. Although the word Constitution does not always mean public due to its nature and the way that the Constitution for the United States of America was written, it stands as public law and is used as a guideline to help stipulate common law. So when you have your head screwed on tight, you can even use quasi laws that they have, because even in their quasi stuff, when you scan through it, it's always stuff that takes you back to the common law. What's the common law? Constitution and treaties, which is the positive law. It's just up to us to be studious and look through it, and it is what it is. International law, the law which regulates the intercourse of nations. So that's back to being part of a nation. A treaty would be an example of international law. Two people enter into a treaty that are two different citizens, two different nationalities of people. The customary law, which determines the rights and regulations of intercourse of independent states in peace and war. Public international law is the body of rules which control the conduct of independent states in their relations with each other. Now, in this context, is back to what we read earlier about states. So when you think of states, think of clans of our people. So like, even though Cherokee would be a European corruption of Anishinaabe, I'm sorry, the Ayawana, Cherokee would be a European corruption of that. But so let's just for example, so Cherokee, the Seminoles, the whatever, the different tribes, so quote unquote, those would be called states or clans. And those are just a subdivision of the nation as a whole. So you wouldn't say, I'm part of the Cherokee Nation. That's not proper. The Cherokees is a subdivision of a nationality of people that are called Moors. It's just a state, a political subdivision. But that's not a nationality. It's not a Cherokee. What's your nationality? I'm Cherokee. That's not what you would say. Oh, what's your nationality? I'm a Khalifa Society. That's not what you would say, right? These are just clans or subdivisions, right? All right, so keep that in mind. So these clans can work together and form what you call confederations, right? Such as the Iroquois Confederation would be an example of one of our five clans that linked up because the Europeans was coming over here. And we had to settle our differences, because prior to that confederation, we were infighting. These clans were fighting amongst our people. Our brothers was fighting amongst each other for dumb, stupid reasons. So, this is all for context purposes, just to know what's going on with our history. Private international law is that branch of municipal law which determines before the courts of what nation a particular action or suit should be brought, and by the law of what nation it should be determined. Treaty, dealing with international law, a compact made between two or more independent nations with a view of the public welfare, case law to support that, an agreement, a league or contract. So a treaty is a contract, right? That's a contract between two or more nations or sovereigns, formally signed by commissioners, properly authorized, and solemnly ratified by the several sovereigns of the supreme power of each state. So a treaty signifies what? A contract between who? Two sovereigns, two separate nations of people. So let's look at the treaty once again. Treaty of Peace and Friendship between Morocco and the United States. Two separate nations of people came into a treaty. So this is international law. This is under the jurisdiction of international law. We got two parties. Who are the parties? Moors, short for Moroccan, and the United States. Who are the United States? The various Europeans, French, Dutch, Irish, British, that disconnected from their sovereign power, formed a confederation, and called themselves the United States. Two separate nations of people. The United Nations declarations are formal, explicit announcements to help stipulate standards to guide towards world peace. Declaration of Human Rights of the Child, rights of indigenous people. That's another door. Once you claim your nationality, now we can invoke these indigenous rights, which are international law. But if our people think they got shipped off a boat from Africa, they're not looking at America as something that they're indigenous to even go through that door. Civil law. A personal action which is instituted to compel payment or the doing of some other thing which is purely civil. Civil suits relate to and affect only individual rights, whereas criminal prosecutions involve public wrongs. Case law to support that. They include all cases both at law and in equity. Equity just means fairness in law, which cannot legally be denominated criminal cases. Pretty self-explanatory. Civil law deals with the violations of contracts and inequities or unfairness, whereas criminal law deals with the theft or destruction of person or property, to which both civil and criminal law issues need to have an injured party. That's what I'm saying. To which the accused is obligated to provide remedy. If there's no injured party, a human being saying you injured them or their property, then there's no crime. Transitioning to jurisdiction. Juris, meaning right, diction, dealing with words. So you must use the right words in law to determine your status, because your status is determined by what you know, and what you know determines what you say. All right, which puts you in a certain jurisdiction. Within the realm of jurisprudence, there is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the power, the authority, or of someone to make decisions, administer justice, and handle affairs. It is the overall ability to have a legitimate say in something. There are several types of jurisdiction: land, territorial jurisdiction, air jurisdiction, sea jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, and personam jurisdiction, dealing with the body, right? Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, or law definition of jurisdiction. The word is a term of large and comprehensive import and embraces every kind of judicial action. Case law to support that: Federal Land Bank of Louisville, Kentucky versus Combry, and McGowan versus McGowan. It is the authority by which courts and judicial officers take cognizance of and decide cases. More case law to support that. The legal right by which judges exercise their authority. It exists when courts has cognizance of class of cases involved, proper parties are present, and point to be decided within its issues. So it's back to the status. And like, you know, when you're dealing with non-US citizens, the federal level, right, is the, you know, municipal courts can't even deal with non-US citizens. When you go to Article 3 of the Constitution, you know, it talks about any disputes. Matter of fact, let me bring that up so y'all can see that. Any disputes with non-US citizens, the Supreme Court level would be the court for that. Not municipal court. Okay, so here we go. So section 2, well, for one, we might as well cover this. So the judicial power of the United States shall be invested in one Supreme Court. That's first of all. Anything that's not the Supreme Court needs jurisdiction or delegation of authority from Congress to exist. That's one element. So anything that's not the Supreme Court, you look in there, you look on the wall, there's nothing saying that this court was delegated properly by Congress. That's a fraud court. But that's not the reason why I'm even bringing this up right now. But I just want to throw that in there. So the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity, law and fairness, arising under this Constitution. The laws of the United States, the treaties made. So they're saying what? They're saying the treaties are the supreme law of the land as well. And that wasn't even my main point of going in here, but I want to throw that in there. Treaties are the supreme law, or which shall be made under this authority to cases affecting ambassadors. Now, what's an ambassador? A representative of a nation. What is a nation? That's the root word for nationality. Nationality. So when a state is formed, by people that know their nationality, or an organization is formed by the same people of the same nationality that are competent as such, you have what you call ambassadors, representatives of a nation. All right. So when there are any cases affecting ambassadors or other public ministers and consuls, all these are synonyms. These represent competent members of an organization, or competent members of a state, competent members of a clan, competent members of a national organization of people of the same nationality that know law, can dialogue, which is called diplomacy, being able to speak with other nationalities of people to discuss treaty matters, etc. If there are any cases involving these such people, it's Supreme Court level. To controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states. So now we know what state is. Now we have competency on how to read this Constitution. Most people will look at this and be like, oh, if it's a controversy between somebody in the state of California and the state of New York, that's not what that means. We read the definition of state. So controversy between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state. between citizens of different states, between citizens and of the same state claiming land under grants of different states, etc. Citizens of foreign states. In all cases affecting ambassadors, and that's repetition because they just set it up here. So that means they're doing this on purpose to let you know jurisdiction. Ministers and councils, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. So the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction in what? All cases or disputes between two separate nations of people. So if we're not U.S. citizens and we have a dispute, federal court, or really it's saying Supreme Court, but any court that has a federal jurisdiction. All right, so that's what we're talking about, status and jurisdiction, how this all ties in. All right, so that was my main point of bringing this up, is showing you that any disputes between two separate nations, a court of a federal level is proper. But of course, if you don't know your nationality, you don't have organizations working with each other, you're a ward of a state. So the municipal court has jurisdiction over wards and minorities. So you're going to go talk to that magistrate. All right, so an example of jurisdiction is the King of England. He will only have the power to create laws and deal with the affairs of England. He will not have the same powers to do so if he were in China, as that is an entire separate jurisdiction, and he will be considered a foreigner. The sovereign nationals of the land would have the jurisdiction in China, all inclusive: land, territorial jurisdiction, air jurisdiction, and sea jurisdiction, etc. As far as personam jurisdiction, that depends on any treaties or agreements made to handle a situation where a foreigner would be brought to court. Normally, in a situation like that, which is between the two separate nations, a consular court will be established where each nation will have their own legally competent parties present representing each nation. That's an ambassador. As a consul, that's a foreign minister, as well as international laws and treaties that they wish to enter into enforcement, etc., in order to properly administer justice. Jurisdiction of subject matter means just a jurisdiction of class, of classes, or class of cases to which particular case belong. That's his Ania versus Graham, a case law where it was ruled upon as well. Subject matter jurisdiction is simply in regards to criminal matters or civil matters dealing with classification of law, again, both which are dealt with in Article 3, which we just read. We just read that. The question will cut deeper later on in this book. All right, so before we transition to the next segment, I want to make sure everybody digests and comprehends what we were talking about thus far. Does anybody have any questions on how Article 3 is dealing with diversity of citizenship?
I don't know, I got a question, but I just will share something really quick. There was a time way back when I had, before I had a California driver's license, I had a license that was what they called an international driver's license. And before that, I had no idea that, because I'm a resident, not a citizen. But I wanted to get a car, and I couldn't get a California driver's license because I was not a U.S. citizen. I wasn't born here, and I didn't go through the whole paperwork thing, right? I went to someone who gave me advice and said, all you need to get is a national driver's license. And the way it ties into this is it basically like I didn't know that there was, like, again, laws outside of state or whatever laws that they put here that would allow me to still operate and do things. And that's what I'm pulling from a lot of this, a lot of the information you're showing is like, there's these laws, and you can understand the state laws or federal laws, but there's also laws that we don't know about, that allow us to operate differently here. That's what I took from it. Just sharing that.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Anybody else had any thing that they want to add?
Yeah, I add something to it. Kind of similar to what he said, but you really like. I know if you read the technical book that was given to us, it really states that in there that anytime you need a license, if you're dealing with their organization, you need their stuff if you're dipping dabbing into their corporation. But if you're not dipping and dabbing into them, then you wouldn't really need that at all. You would need, of course, the nationality card, which is everything in one. And and as also too, like whatever that you say, you know, that's just what it is. So that's all I wanted to say. I mean, that's all.
Wow. Wow, man. So just transitioning to a historical aspect. And once again, the whole purpose of this is not only to get grounded, but so we can eloquently explain this to other people, friends, and family, to bring them to this centralization of unity to create a state. All right. Slave trade. In the 1500s through 1800s, the Moroccan Empire and the pale-skinned nations of Europe had extensive political relations, mainly negotiating treaties. As depicted in the synopsis of the ancient wars, historical events, and the like, the European powers were still at war with the Moroccan Empire during the establishment of the United States colonies, as the Moroccan Empire extended from Egypt, West Africa, even on the American continents, ruling the ocean in between. The Europeans were allowed to colonize and set up trading posts in portions of America. European merchants and sellers were often captured and held in captivity by the Moroccan Empire. Many of us on this side of the empire did not want Europeans on our lands due to the ancient hatreds as well as Inquisition operations spreading to this side of the empire, America. And when we say Inquisition operations, we're talking about the Spanish Inquisition, which was a papal bull issued by the Pope to conquer or attempt to conquer everything west of Rome. And if they were successful doing that, send 10% of all revenue back to the Vatican, which is called tithes. In law, when you look up the word tithe, it's called Roman tax. All right. So keep that in mind. If nobody knows what the Spanish Inquisition is, just take your time out and look that up on your own and look at it in its entirety. So these were Inquisition operations spreading to this side of the empire, the Americas. Thus, just like the Barbary slave trade, Europeans were enslaved by us. European powers paid annual tribute. That's the rent we were talking about that George Washington was referring to in his letter to our Sultan. He was saying sorry for missing, in his words, verbatim, the annual marks of I forgot. I can't think. I had a brain for it. But annual marks of attention that you're so used to having. He was saying in a cute way, sorry for missing a rent payment. Sorry for missing my rent or tribute. That's what it's called, international law tribute. So European powers pay annual tribute to the Moroccan Empire in order to pass unmolested on the seas, often paying ransoms to us for the release of European prisoners. Booty and prize. That was the law term for booty and prize. And once again, they tried to picture our people as these Vikings and going across the sea just, no, this was an organized government. And the empire spanned the whole world damn near. So we was crossing the seas, going back and forth in an elaborate style boats, elaborate boats that go fast. All right. Exquisite technology. So the reason we would sink some of the European ships is because they weren't honoring the contract, the treaty, and they missed some payments. So we had to take the gold and the silver that they had, or anything. That was the reason why we were doing that, because they were not being honored. Europeans in rebellion often captured Moors in return and held us in captivity. And so we have been ransomed off. So now we're getting a full context of what was going on here. All right. It wasn't just this slaves off a boat type of deal. There was a lot going on. Many modern scholars depict what is falsely called slavery in a very tunnel vision point of view. This is not done by accident. It is created to draw out many emotional and false arguments, to keep people in constant role of playing victim and other hamster wheel arguments, as well as to keep this idea that Europeans were in real position of power to do the things they may claim to have done, when in fact, they played no real or detrimental role. I trust that this more accurate portrayal of history will lead you to the same conclusion that many of us Aboriginal and Indigenous Moors, our Moroccans, or Americans simply, falsely called Indians, did not want the Europeans on our lands. Yet, some of us did this lead to many fights amongst ourselves. Oftentimes, the modern historians will show that quote-unquote Indians joining the Europeans to fight against other Indians and blacks and Negroes, etc. So once again, for dramatic effect, we were infighting. These Indians, once again, if we can pull up on a public record, that the Lenape Indian tribe was formerly known as the Moors. Just know when we say the Indians were fighting Indians, Moors were fighting Moors. It was infighting. And the Europe or the foreigner would take advantage of that. And in fact, we had sellouts amongst our people that actually fought in their wars against us. When you start talking about the Civil War, the North and the South, that's what was really going on. We're talking about Confederate states. This is not no racist thing going on. Oh, Confederate flag is racist. Nah, when we talk about a confederacy, think about it, the Iroquois Confederation. That's the confederation of 5 indigenous American tribes. So anything that's talking about confederation on American soil, that's the home team. So when we say Confederate states, now that we know what a state is, a clan, right? Confederate states distinguished from corporate states. The war between who? The North and the South, right? That was the Great Civil War, right? But they're trying to make it seem like it was a different page. So just know that the Moors had to unite and form the Iroquois Confederation and knock off the infighting because these foreigners had a plan, this Inquisition and things of that nature. Oftentimes, the false notion that all so-called Black people were taken from Africa as slaves, this idea can be dispelled very quickly with simple math and etymology principles of language, history, and government records. For example, according to etymology and as sourced from 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro by J.A. Rogers, page 18, fact number 63. What does fact number 63 say? The word slave is really pronounced Slav, was originally applied to white people or Europeans. It comes from Slav, a Russian people captured by the Germans. All right, so that's what a Slav or a slave is. It's short for Slavic, which is a modern European or Albion, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. So that's what the Slavs were. So it was a Slav trade because we had them in captivity, as you see. The word Slav, well, we just read that. For the record, it is an established fact that Europeans in America were not referred to as white into various KKK crusades across America in the 1870s to promote this new idea of them being considered white men. White is a social political status and has nothing to do with skin complexion. Let's go back to the law dictionary. And we'll just read it twice. I want to actually go to the actual dictionary and look up free white person. So here we have it. And then we'll go back to, of course, it's in the reading as well, but free white person. We're going to script this commercial 1870 Naturalization Act. We're going to get to the real definition right here. It includes all European Jews, more or less intermixed with people of Celtic. When you look up the Celtic civilization, that was the Aboriginal and indigenous Moors of Scotland, the Dutch, the Netherlands, the original Irish. They were highly melanated Moors. You can get a book called Ancient and Modern Britons. It's a 2-volume book that talk about how the Moors were the original people of Europe. So that's who the Celtics were, the Scandinavians, the Teutonics, those are Moors, the Iberian Latin. We spoke Moorish Latin. The original Iberians were the Moors. That's why I say it's not called Europe like that. It was called Europe based on Queen Europa having jurisdiction over an area called Iberian Peninsula or Asia Minor. And those Albions that got shipped from essentially Mexico, Central America area when they were created, it was too hot. The sun seeked to kill them because they didn't have melanin. We had to ship them to a colder part of the world. And it was under the jurisdiction of Queen Europa. That's why we call them Europeans. But we say modern European to distinguish them from the ancient people of that area, which were called Celtics, etc. Greek and Slavic descent. So it includes Magyars, which are Moors, Lapps and Finns, which are Moors, the Basques and the Albanians, all these are Moors. And it includes the mixed Latin, Celtic, Iberian, which I just explained, were the Moors. And what does it say? The Moorish inhabitants of Spain, which we call Al-Andalus before it got conquered in 1492 by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. So the Moorish inhabitants of Al-Andalus, which they're saying Spain and Portugal, because the original people of Portugal, the original people of Al-Andalus or Spain were the Moors. And the mixed Greek, Latin, Phoenician, we know the Phoenicians are the Moors. And the Phoenicians in America are called the Olmecs. That's our people that created phonics or phonetics. Phoenician is dealing with the reason the foreigners called our people Phoenicians because we created the alphabet system. Phonetics, Phoenician, phonics. The reason the foreigners call our people Latin because we spoke Moorish Latin. Or not, I'm sorry, the reason the foreigners call our people Latino is because we spoke Latin. The reason the foreigner called our people Arabs because we spoke Arabic. I know I'm reading the definition, but I'm saying extracurricular things as well for context purposes. So the Phoenicians are Moors, and the North African inhabitants of Sicily, so the original Sicilians is Moors. And the mixed Slav, see how they say Slav? So if the Slav was mixed with Moorish blood, right, they were considered free white people or had a white status. Because it's not a nationality. White and black are status. All right. So the Tartarians, those are Moors. The original Russians is Moors, the Tsars. Right? We know Vladimir is a Moorish title. All right. It does not mean Caucasian race, Aryan race, or Indo-European race. So most people that identified as white or so, that's a white person. That's not what the status of white means. So the Moors in America, status is white. they had to play musical chairs in the 1870s via the KKK and say that term. So our people, who are really the white status, will call them the foreigner white. And whenever you speak something like that, that's a magic ritual. You giving your power away. So of course we went to the actual dictionary and read it, but we'll read it again because it's also in this book. Free white person does not mean Caucasian race, Aryan race, or Indo-European races. It includes Moorish inhabitants of Spain and their descendants, including such descendants in other countries to which they have immigrated. I'm gonna bring up the actual etymology dictionary to look up the word black or Moor to show you, even in etymology or grammar, it's set, first of all, a Moor is just any dark-skinned person. That's why our people, our brothers and sisters that speak Moorish Latin, which is commercially called Spanish today, they'll say moreno or morena, which just means dark-skinned male or dark-skinned female. All right. That's all a Moor is. Any melanated people on the planet is Moors. Now look at the separation. They're separating because, of course, we weren't black or Moor. This is a new term in the 1600s. Because remember, 1492, one of our forts got conquered, so they started factoring the books. But back at this time, you can see the adjective which describes a noun. A noun is a person, place, or thing. And you notice it's a capital M. Because when you talk about somebody's nationality, it's always going to be capital. Moor is a nationality of people. Black is not. It's lowercase, and it's an adjective, which describes, it's a color. All right? Keep these things in mind when we're talking to our friends and family. We want to have things like this already queued up just to instill common sense amongst our brothers and sisters. So once again, he has that definition in this book. I just wanted to show you the source as well. So black and Moor, black plus Moor, we just went over that, any dark-skinned person. And that's from the Webster's Dictionary 11th Collegiate Edition. So Slav or Slavic is a nationality, and it applies a pale-skinned European. The word black has been connotatively or loosely or nickname used to imply dark-skinned people in order to cause confusion, in a way simultaneously alter history. In fact, black people were the first to be forced into servitude in America, as black etymologically means pale. The first freed black Europeans established a settlement in Virginia, 1607. So I want to make sure y'all know when he says black means pale, I want to just look up so y'all can see what that means. Just the definition of black, just as a definition. In this early, when you take it back to the original root. So of course, you know, when you're looking at in a scholarly way at any definition, you're going to look at what did the word mean in its original acception. So you're going to go from English and take it all the way back to what it meant in its original sense. Pale. That's what it meant. Pale. So if we're using words correctly, then pale people will be referred to as black. So when I say musical chairs, switching the seats, this is what I'm talking about. This is basic information. I was like, oh my God. Like that, our people that look at this and be like, oh my God, we've been bamboozled, right? But it's very simple. So the Pilgrims are black status. They're also black. They were black because they were pale. All right. In fact, black people were the first to be forced into servitude in America, dealing with Jamestown or 1607, Virginia. The story of what is falsely labeled slavery is in fact forced servitude to an extent, as there was also voluntary servitude. It varied in severity basis on the master, as an example, as an excerpt from The Golden Trade of the Moors by Ivan Van Sertima, 12 through 13. So I'm going to read this quote from a book called The Golden Age of the Moor, which is about $8,000 right now. For some odd reason, I wonder why. Well, we know why, but look at the chat. Exactly. Universal Wisdom Bay Islam. She put in the chat, Trading Places. Exactly. That Eddie Murphy movie is based in Philadelphia, too. That's where the treaty was signed, by the way. The Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Let's go back to the treaty. This treaty right here, this was signed and ratified in Philadelphia. Trading Places, the movie that the Empress just put in the chat, is a movie by Eddie Murphy. I forgot the Albion guy name, but they switching places. All right. I'm telling you in real time what that movie is trying to depict. Just like the Shakespeare play Othello the Moor is depicting what? The interaction between our Sultan in America and the sovereign monarch, Queen Elizabeth I. And now they had a diplomatic negotiation, which ultimately gave rise to allowing her subjects to have colonies over here, such as Jamestown, New York, and all these eventually became 13 colonies. So we have to know the signs and symbols. Once we know the history and law within exactness, all these movies gonna pop out. You're gonna see all these signs and symbols because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Matter of fact, the convenience store 7-Eleven, right? I don't know the significance of 7-Eleven, but that's when we entered into Island of Luz and cleaned it up from the great diseases that the Albions was having. They were spreading diseases because they wasn't bathing. We had to teach them how to bathe. And we stopped the Great Plague over there. So that's an example of what that represents. 7-Eleven. So here's a quote from The Golden Age of the Moors by Ivan Van Sertima. Some despots and merchants did trade in Slavs during part of the Moorish occupation of Al-Andalus, which is now called Spain. Most of these, before European slave trade, were European Slavs. It has been said that slavery among the Muslims and slavery amongst the Catholics had important differences. So when they're saying in this book, this is a quote from this book, Ivan Van Sertima, when he's saying Muslims, he'll say Muslim and he'll say Muslim. They're the same thing. When you look it up, Muslim, they'll say it's the archaic or the ancient way of describing saying Muslim, but essentially they're the same thing. But Muslim has an acronym to it, which talks about what? Muscles, oxygen, skeleton, ligaments, electrical system, and magnetism. So that's the body, all, you know. But I won't, that's not my point in this context. Just know when he's saying the Moors, he's talking about the Muslims. Ivan Van Sertima. When he's talking about the Catholics, he's talking about not only the pale Albions, but our people that decided to become Roman. Still dark people. So this was actually a form of infighting too. Our people had a different ideology. And they started fighting each other. All right, so the Muslims and slavery among the Catholics had important differences. Owners did not possess the power of life and death over them, nor could they inflict excessive punishment. So we weren't doing that when we had Slavs and the women as our harem. We weren't treating them bad. Like I said, we taught them high science. You know, we treat them very well. Slavs had rights, and they could actually seek assistance if they were exceedingly mistreated or maltreated. They, dark-skinned Moors, did not destroy their Slavs' legal system, rob them of their political rights, nor deny them of their claims to humanity. So we weren't treating them bad. Wasn't whipping them and you know, doing things to create genocide so they won't know who they are, their culture and the stuff that's happening to our people right now. We weren't doing that. We wasn't, you know, messing up their school system so they don't know who they are, none of that type of stuff. According to James Weller, Muslim Africans brought millions of Europeans over the centuries into northern African ports. Many of the same Europeans brought by the shipload to Africa were then sent to America, where they remained in indentured servitude. So it seems like here that the slave trade did exist, but it's important to know that it was a pale people getting shipped, blonde hair, blue eyed people getting shipped by our people. So Brother Gary said in the chat, that's important because the common counter argument by whites is that we sold our own into slavery, right? Exactly.
Yeah, no, I was just saying because it's the note making the note that there was a Moorish system that gave those Slavs rights. That thinking was more than likely the thinking of anyone going into the Americans, that was sold into the American version of slavery, that there would be certain rights still there. So sometimes you run into some people that throw that argument that we did this to ourselves type thing, but it's not necessarily we did it to ourselves. It was a system that people still had rights. No one knew that what happened later on was going to happen, that did that, and that I think that's important, highlighting that there was a system that gave rights back then. It wasn't what that punishment that we saw later on.
Right. Exactly. That's excellent. So the Eurocentric version of slavery is used as a means to induce a false matrix or a false dimension in thought pattern to continue to make the natural Aboriginal and Indigenous people of the land at law non-descendable, which means you can't inherit property. And that's why back to estate in the definition of status, because remember, your nationality determines your status, and your status determines if you can own property. So now that we know that, we know when we say that you don't have the capacity to inherit or you're non-descendable, now we know why that's in play. Many of the stories of the harsh mistreatments were in fact just flip scripts, right? That's why I say the musical chairs. We're at our trading places, like the Emperor said, flip scripts. The Europeans placed themselves over us, took on the position of master, and all the harsh mistreatments we caused to them was inverted or karma and caused back onto us. Now, some of our people were treating them bad, but they went rogue though because they had personal feelings. The whole collective said, we're going to run it like this. Okay, we get what happened. Things may have happened, but we're going to run it like this. A couple of our people was like, nah, man. And, a couple of our people treated them bad. All right. So that karma came back on us later in the game. So the Empress put in the chat, we governed our own selves. We didn't have a single government like today. Exactly, right? So back to the definition of a state. You have that right because you the people now. It's back to we the people. That right to govern yourself. Because when you go back to state, because all this is everything everybody is saying right now ties in back to state. Not only is it the people in an organized fashion, but capable of making war and peace. And what independent sovereignty and control over all things within its boundaries. Now, when we're saying boundaries, this is not invisible borders. We're talking about the boundaries of the people and what they're coming up with intellectually, how they're going to run the state. That's a contract because that's going to reflect on paper too, whether it be board meetings, So it's going to be treasurers elected, secretaries elected, right? Heads like chiefs, or it's called sheiks in our culture, right? And these are what you call trustees. The people will become just the beneficiaries, right? So that's how you obtain sovereignty. It's not you're not sovereign. We're not sovereign citizens. That's a CIA term for one, FBI term to make it seem like you're combative. We're not sovereign citizens, but you get a status of sovereignty or being sovereign once you're working together in an organized manner because you invoke trust law, which creates a jurisdictional line because it's a contract. So that's the theme for today, is keeping that in mind. So let me go back. So allegedly, this is a quote. This is a quote from Golden Age of the Moors. Allegedly, 5 million to 20 million slaves arrived in the Americas between 1540 and 1850 over a 310-year period, according to U.S. history books. If you look at the following facts of published material, we are living under another ideological part of American revisionist history. Also, the following undermines the whole breadth and depth of what is written in the American history books. By using simple calculations, the following information can be ascertained. Over a period of 300 years, is it fair to say that 60,000 Slavs were transported annually to the Americas? Or has the transportation of Slavs to the Americas been one big myth? The largest seagoing vessel carried 400 Slavs, but not all of the ships were that large. Time and passage was about 3 to 4 months to get to what you call, what most people think is Africa and America. About 3 or 4 months to travel the sea. That means 200 vessel ships per year would have to travel carrying 300 people. One ship could make 3 passages per year. The transatlantic slave trade database says there were 1,100 to 1,400 voyages made over that 300-year period. If that is the case, and each ship carried 400 people, the total number would be 560,000 Africans that were transported. It still does not add up. It doesn't add up. But they don't expect our people to do this math. What water distillation process did the Europeans possess? Because, of course, all these humans are going to need water by the time they get to America. How was they doing this? How was they feeding these people? How did they have ships? We just read George Washington said he didn't have no navy, didn't have no ships. How is this same crew saying they shipping all these people over here? Because the cargo is precious and the need of survival is extremely high. It's a 3 to 4 month voyage with approximately 200 prisoners of war abroad. You have to give fresh water weekly, not salt water, fresh water. Remember, the filtering process. The average person can only go without water for a week and a half or 2 weeks. Let me check the chat. So the emperor said those were the Irish Slavs and other indigenous servants who came until 1858, which was the last ship known as the Slav ship. Right? So think about how the ocean is salt water. Who was doing the filtration to give us fresh water? With this cockamamie story. How did they survive? How much fresh water was taken on the trip? Because remember, if the ship gets too heavy, it's going to sink. So keep in mind, not knowing how many said Africans were going to be catched, it is nothing more than a revisionist history. If this is not true, then explain why said blacks were not allowed to read, write for over 100 years, from 1740 to 1863. In the so-called southern states, I suspect to rewrite our heritage into his story. Now that makes sense once our people became prisoners of war. Of course, we know they weren't allowed to read and write. And I want to go back to Christian Black Code. We went over this last week. But keep in mind, remember, on the same land of America, you have people that still know who they were as Moors, and then the people that got caught up in the POW camps and became part of the colonies. At that point, our people refer to themselves as Indians, blacks, and Negroes. When you look up the Civil Rights Act, one of the nicknames of the Civil Rights Act is called the Indian Act. So that shows you right there that blacks and Indians are the same people. But what else does it show? It shows on the same landmass, you have people with different mentalities, which means they had different status. So you had blacks that were subject to Christian black codes, and you had the Moors who knew they were, and the foreigners will call out those people Jews. The Jews were the Moors. They want them to be expelled from the colonies. Why? Because they're going to wake the black and Negro Indian people up to the game that's being played around here. So last week we saw Sundry Free Moors Act. Oh, I still got to cue that. Once again, for repetition, we have people that know who they were in the 1790s. This was during that whole slave trade era. There's people that know they were Moors. They do not want to be tried under the Negro Acts. We got a treaty of peace and friendship. We got a sultan. We two separate nations of people. We're not black, Negro, and colored. Latino and Hispanic. Puerto Rican and Indian. Not to be considered subject of state law. Penal code, statutes, and ordinances, modern day Negro law, modern day Christian black codes. It's a status issue. All right, I want to just drive that home. The world changed dramatically in 1492, not only because Columbus stumbled in the direction of the Americas, but because that was the very same year the Moors were defeated. And mind you, this man, Christopher Columbus, did not come over here like he was just exploring. For one, he didn't know how to navigate the sea. Remember, the Moors taught the Slavs how to navigate. He had an assistant with him, Peter the Moor, that showed him how to even get over here. He was what you call a Morisco or a sellout. So that's how even Granada fell, or the Red House, or the Alhambra fell, because some of our people were traitors. But that's a whole nother story. So some of these traitors let these Portuguese, they call themselves British people, modern Europeans, let them know, like, oh, it's another part of the empire across the water in the Americas. So since you shut down this part of the empire on this side, yeah, I can show you all the other stuff on the other side, So that was the intention, to come over here and continue having the empire fall. Because one of the headquarters just fell. And now it was called Spain, right? So just a little context. So the world, I wanted to say that because the way it was worded, I wanted to give more context to that issue. Because that was the very same year the Moors were defeated. It is no accident that it is Spain, Portugal, who spearheaded the movement in this direction. It was on January 2nd, 1492, that the African leader, Abu Abidillah, otherwise known as Bobdil, surrendered to the Spanish. And that was a quote from the Golden Age of the Moors. So, like I said, King Ferdinand, Queen Isabella united their kingdoms. And once we fell in that area, they wanted to come to the larger part of the empire and shut that down. But of course, if they're talking about 1490 something, and then we got a treaty in 1700s, clearly they weren't successful for 300-400 years. You know, the empire in America, Mexico, South America, the islands were still intact, even though a portion of our empire fell in 1492. So that's just to keep these things in concepts and context and the timelines, so you can see how our culture, how things went down. Everything just didn't happen overnight to get to the condition that we're in today. And our people are going to ask these questions. How did it get to this point? We were such in power. Us as ambassadors need to competently answer these questions, because this is our culture. Studies of the slave traffic of that time show that the numbers of people of Slavic and European descent placed into servitude far exceeded the number of Sudanese and other Africans. So they're saying Ivan Van Sertima in the Golden Age of the Moors, page 93, is laying the foundation that Slavs, blonde hair, blue-eyed people, far exceeded the number of Sudanese in servitude. All right. More proof that the black-skinned Europeans were in fact in bondage. Here first is another book written by Michael A. Hoffman II. So now we're saying black skin because we should know black means pale. So we're talking about these blonde hair, blue-eyed people that were Slavs in America. Here's another book called They Were White and They Were Slaves, the untold story of the enslavement of whites in early America. That's another book to cross-reference. The following are excerpts that I have selected from the previously mentioned book as an auxiliary supports proving that the entire slave story that is taught in contemporary schools is not the whole truth, but in fact only told in part to benefit the European dominance falsely referred to as white supremacy over these lands. So here's a quote from They Were White and They Were Slaves. This is a history of white people that has never been told in any coherent form, largely because most modern historians have for reasons of political and psychology refused to recognize the white Slavs in early America as just that. And of course, he's using white Slavs. So of course, we just learned what white means, the status. But for context of this book, and most people reading this book, they might not know that, and they're going to think about just pale people being slaves. That's a whole new concept to most people. They just think it was highly melanated people were the only slaves. All right, so today, here's another quote. Today, not a tear is shed for the suffering of millions of our own enslaved forefathers. And the author, the reason he's saying our, because this author is a modern European of this book, They Were White, They Were Slaves. Michael A. Hoffman, he would be a modern European, or Abiyan. So his position is, we were actually slaves, not the quote unquote black people. And the fact that a modern European is even putting this out there lets you know that this is common information. This is not nothing. That's another thing I want to let everybody know. They don't have no problem telling you the truth. You know, 200 years of white slavery in America have been almost completely obliterated from the collective memory of the American people. Who wants to be reminded of that half? Perhaps as many as thirds of the original European colonists came here not of their own free will, but kidnapped, shanghaied, impressed, duped, and beguiled, and yes, in chains. We tend to gloss over it, we'd prefer to forget the whole sorry chapter. From the 8th to 11th century, France was a major transfer point for white slaves to the Muslim world. So that's the Slav women, the harems, and the Slav men in the Moorish world. He's saying Muslim world, but I say it's synonymous with Moorish world, with Rome being the center for the selling of the Irish and Flemish Slavs. Before the 10th century, the Muslims generally brought Christian Europeans as Slavs. By the 10th century, Slavs became the most numerous imported group. During the late Middle Ages until the fall of Granada in the late 15th century, most Slavs of the Muslims were Christians from northern kingdoms. Every Muslim text provides insight into the extent to which the Arabs identify Europeans with slavery, classify white slaves as animals, and even produced learned racist disquisitions on the supposed merits of emasculated East European Slavs. David Bryan Davis' writings in the New York Reviews of Books, October 11, 1990, page 37 states, as late as the 14th century and 15th centuries, continuing shipments of white Slavs, some of them Christians, flowed from the booming slave markets on the northern Black Sea coast into Italy, Spain, Egypt, the Mediterranean islands, from Barbados to Virginia colonists, showed few scopes about reducing their less fortunate countrymen to a status little different from that of chattel slaves. The prevalence and suffering of white slaves, serfs, and indentured servants in the early modern period suggests that there was nothing inevitable about limiting plantation slavery to people of African origin. So it wasn't just Africans that were slaves. In 1659, the English Parliament debated the practice of selling British whites into slaves in the New World. In the debate, the whites were referred to as the indentured servants, but as Slavs, those enslavement threatened the liberties of all Englishmen. All right, so I just wanted to go over, it's a lot more statements from books that support the fact that the Slavs were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I wanted to go into a nice piece. Any questions on that before I transition? So once again, now that we know what a state is and nationality is, dealing with the status, dealing with the allegiance to your people, when we say a citizen, as we looked at in Article 3, dealing with diversity of citizenship, what is a citizen? What is a citizen? What makes you a citizen? Back in the law dictionary, a citizen, and this is repetition, a member of a free city or jural society, possessing all the rights and privileges which can be enjoyed by any person under its constitution and government, and subject to corresponding duties. So citizens have duties. The reason they're duties because the organization of those people in a state created what you call bylaws or rules and regulations on what the people are going to stick by or adhere to or have allegiance to. Rather, it be dues, uplifting fallen humanity, being, So citizens are members of a community inspired to a common goal, who, in associated relations, submit themselves to rules of conduct for the promotion of general welfare and conservation of individual as well as collective rights. a member of a nation or body politic of the sovereign state or political society who owes allegiance. So you see how you got nationality determines your allegiance. But a citizen is saying that you are an active member in your state. You have duties. Your whole mind state is to do what? Promotion of the general welfare of that state or organization. You're a citizen of your nation. And that's why no taxation without representation. So we're not paying taxes to the IRS. But every nation state or national organization, they pay taxes to each other via what we call them temple dues, or you can just call them community dues. Khalifa Society, the name of this organization, we like to do $10 a week, where we, everybody has their own situation. But the importance of that is to build the treasury for the state, for business purposes, or any other thing that the people may see fit that are showing allegiance to the organization. That's what makes you a citizen of a nation. Any questions for our transition to reading the bylaws of Noble Jew Ali? So the whole purpose of an organization is just that, organization. So Khalifa Society, matter of fact, let me go to our bylaws for this particular organization before I transition to the national constitution for Moorish people that we can utilize politically. So I'm gonna go to khalifasociety.org. Because that's the name of this organization of Moors, Khalifa Society. So you go to the public record, go to the bylaws. So when we're talking about a nation state, this would be what you call the bylaws of Khalifa Society, right? Organization. And I just recommend everybody kind of go through this on their own. Like I say, the people involved can amend, etc. But this is, this is a study group, this particular group right here. But the whole goal is to get competent and run an organization. So now, what I was getting at of reading is a divine constitution. We read this last week, but this is what we're aiming towards. The Grand Sheik and the chairman, this is elected officials. When we're dealing with trust law, we're dealing with a Grand Sheik. In Arabic, we'll say sheik, but in English, it'd just be a chief. So we're talking about a state, we're talking about a clan, heads of a clan that was elected by the people, which are the beneficiaries. So remember, when we pop this off, we're dealing with we the people. We the people is organizational structure, right? So the Grand Sheik and the chairman of Moorish America are empowered to make law and enforce laws with the assistance of the prophet and the grand body of Moorish America. Of course, we know when we say prophet, we're saying the messenger. All right, of course, messenger of what? Truth, uplifting, getting the people at that time back with their heads screwed on straight. Rather it be Yahshua, or most people call Jesus, Prophet Muhammad's time, Yahshua, Confucius, Buddha. There were great men and women during different time frames that brought this information of why it's important to unify, why you need to stop serving carnal customs and get back to following your ancestors' ways, because there's different divine protections behind that. This movement is no different. Noble Jew Ali was the last man that woke our people up in values of numbers in a time that we can remember. We're talking about 1920s. Well, that's a little backdrop on this brother Noble Jew Ali right here. So continuing, the assistant grand sheik is to assistant grand sheik in all affairs if he lives according to love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. And it is known before the citizens of Moorish America. Right? Doesn't say U.S. citizens. Citizens of Moorish America. All meetings are to be opened and closed promptly according to the Circle 7. And we're going to read a chapter from the Quran before we close out Circle 7 Quran. Love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Friday is our holy day of rest because on a Friday, the first man was formed in flesh, and on Friday, the first man departed out of flesh and ascended into his Father God Allah. For that cause, Friday is the holy day for all Muslims all over the world. Love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice must be proclaimed and practiced by all citizens of Moorish America. No citizen is to put in danger or accuse falsely his brother or sister on any occasion at all that may harm his brother or sister, because Allah is love. All citizens must preserve these holy and divine laws, and all citizens must obey the laws of the government, because by being a Moorish American, you are part and parcel of the government and must live the life accordingly. No organization of Moorish America, right? So Khalifa Society would be an organization of Moorish America. Is to cause any confusion or to overthrow the laws and constitution of this said government, but to obey thereby. With us, all citizens must proclaim their nationality. So that's another phase. Everybody here, or people that join the organization in the future, need to declare their nationality, come up with a free national name, with a bay or L or an owl or a day at the end. All right. We are teaching, with us, all citizens must proclaim their nationality, and we are teaching our people the nationality and the divine creed, that they may know that they are part and parcel of this said government, and know that they are not Negroes, colored folks, black people, or Ethiopians, because these names were given to slaves by slaveholders in 1779 and lasted until 1865 during that time of slavery. But this is a new era of time now, and all men now must proclaim their free national name to be recognized by the government in which they live and the nations of the earth. This is the reason why Allah, the great God of the universe, ordained Noble Jew Ali, the prophet, to redeem his people from their sinful ways. The Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. All citizens must promptly attend their meetings, and become a part and parcel of all uplifting acts of Moorish America. Moorish Americans must pay their dues. That's what we're talking about, the taxes, because you need economics. Like I said, if we're doing $10 a week and we get 100 members, that's $40,000 every 12 months. That's $250,000 every 3 years. And I said 100 people just for the sake of numbers. And that's not even a lot of people. If it's 8.5 billion of us, 9.5 billion of us, 100 people is not that many people. Especially we got technology, Zoom. They don't even got to be all in California for us to be one body, one mind, right? So must pay their dues, keep in line with all necessities of Moorish America, and then you are entitled to the name of faithful. Husband, you must support your wife and children. Wife, you must obey your husband and take care of your children and look after their duties. Look after the duties of your household. Sons and daughters must obey father and mother and be industrious and become part of the uplifting of fallen humanity. All Moorish Americans must keep their hearts and minds pure with love and their bodies clean with water. This divine covenant is from your holy prophet, Noble Jew Ali, through the guidance of his father, Allah. So I want to transition. We'll read one chapter of the Quran before we close out here. Just a little backdrop. of who Noble Jew Ali is. The prophet and the founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America, which was an institution. Moorish Science Temple of America was an institution to teach our people about nationality and birthrights, law, and the importance of working together. And it was looked at as a consulate, embassy, etc. Noble Jew Ali, January 8th, 1886, transitioned July 20th, 1929, was an American who founded the Moorish Science Temple of America in 1913. He founded the Canaanite Temple in Newark, New Jersey, before relocating to Chicago, where he gained a following of thousands of people. Following the murder of rival Moorish Science Temple leader, Jew Ali was arrested but never charged and sent to jail. He died in 1929, shortly after being released. Several details of Jew Ali's early life are uncertain, as true information became mixed with that of legend by his devout followers. He is believed to have been born Timothy Drew on January 8, 1886 in North Carolina. His spouses were Pearl Drew Ali and Mary Drew Ali. Drew Ali reported that during his travels in Egypt, he met a high priest of Egyptian magic. In one version of Drew Ali's biography, the leader saw him as a reincarnation of the founder. In others, he claimed that the priest considered him a reincarnated Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and other religious prophets. According to the biography, the high priest trained Ali in mysticism and gave him a lost section of the Quran. The text came to be known as the Holy Quran of the Moorish Holy Temple of Science, and then the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. It is also known as the Circle 7 Quran because of its cover, which features a red 7 surrounded by a blue circle. Here's a picture of one of the National Convention days back in 1928. In early 1929, following a conflict over funds, Claude Green Bay, the business manager of Chicago Temple No. 1, split the Moorish Science Temple of America. He declared himself Grand Chief and took a number of members with him. On March 15th, Green Bay was stabbed to death at the Unity Hall of the Moorish Science Temple, Indiana Avenue in Chicago. So here's another picture of the National Convention. One of the annual conventions at Unity Hall in Chicago. That's not even, like I said, he woke up like 10,000 people. This is not even a fraction. And we had a Moorish mayor, Oscar the Priest, who was the mayor of Chicago at that time. And he was he was Constitution and Treaty as it pertains to the Moors. So if you got that many people living next to each other in one area, you got political voting power. That's why all these Asians becoming judges and councilmen and all that, because they're everywhere, concentrated areas. They got political power. So Drew Ali was out of town at this time, as he was dealing with a former Supreme Grand Governor, Lamox Bey, who had reported Green Bay's attempted coup. Then Drew Ali returned to Chicago. The police arrested him and other members of the community on suspicion of having instigated the killing. No indictment was sworn for Drew Ali at that time. So here's a funeral of Noble Drew Ali. Shortly after his release by the police, Drew Ali died at the age of 43 at his home in Chicago on July 20th, 1929. Although the exact circumstances of his death are unknown, the certificate of death stated that Noble Drew Ali died from tuberculosis. Despite the official report, many of his followers speculated that his death was caused by injuries from the police or from other members of the faith. Others thought it was due to pneumonia. The Moor told the Chicago Defender, one of the Moors told the Chicago Defender that the prophet was not ill. His work was done and he had laid his head upon the lap of one of the followers, and passed out. His funeral took place on July 25th, 1929, with hundreds attending. The services were held at the Python Temple in Chicago, followed by the burial at Burr Oak Cemetery nearby. So that's a tombstone, Noble Drew Ali. The death of Drew Ali brought out a number of candidates who viewed to succeed him. Edward Mealy L. stated that he had been declared Noble Drew Ali's successor by Drew Ali himself, while John Givens L., Drew Ali's chauffeur, declared that he was Drew Ali reincarnated. However, the governors at the Moorish Science Temple declared Charles Kirkland Bey to be the successor of Drew Ali and named him Grand Advisor. But there's a paper, the Moorish Guide. This is Brother Mealy L. He was actually the true successor, Noble Drew Ali. There was a lot of controversy behind that, but that's another story. So Wallace Farrar Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, most people know about the Nation of Islam, was previously a prominent member of the Moorish Science Temple. So when we start talking about the Nation of Islam, they got created in the 1930s, and they popped up as soon as the Moorish Science Temple or Noble Drew Ali died. But a lot of their heads, such as Elijah Muhammad, Wallace Farrar Muhammad, were members of the Moorish Science Temple, meaning they were Moors. They had they were Bays and L's, and they knew about nationality. So when I start talking about the sellout movement and the FBI and the CIA, there was people part of our organization that flipped the script and wanted to bury this information. So Wallace Farrar Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, was previously a prominent member in the Moorish Science Temple of America, where he was known as David Ford L. After Drew Ali's death, he claimed to be the prophet reincarnated. When his leadership was largely rejected, he broke away from the Moorish Science Temple and moved to Detroit and founded the Nation of Islam. Right? Everybody knows about the Nation of Islam, Farrakhan and them. So the Nation of Islam leaders denied any historical connection to the Moorish Science Temple of America until February 26, 2014, when Louis Farrakhan acknowledged Noble Drew Ali's contribution to the Nation of Islam. Competing factions developed among the congregations and leaders, especially after the death of the charismatic Ali. 3 independent organizations developed from this ferment. The founding of the Nation of Islam by Wallace Farrar Muhammad in 1930 also created competition for members. In the 1930s, membership was estimated at 30,000, with 1/3 in Chicago. During the post-war years, the Moorish Science Temple of America continued to increase in membership, but at a slower rate. In 1986, the Moroccan ambassador to the United States officially recognized the Moorish Science Temple's Islamic linkage to Morocco through Noble Drew Ali. So that was a member of the Kingdom of Morocco, the king, or one of the ambassadors of the king. He came to America in 1986 and was like, the empire, it was a such thing as a Moorish empire. And people today that think they Black, Negro, colored, need to wake up. It's a connection. All right. And he honored Noble Drew Ali for attempting to wake us up at that time. So during the 1940s, the Moorish Science Temple, specifically Kirkland Bey faction, came to the attention of the FBI, who investigated claims of members committing subversive activities by adhering to and spreading Japanese propaganda. The investigation failed to find any substantial evidence, and the investigations were dropped. The federal agency later investigated the organization in 1953 for violation of Selective Service Act in 1948 and sedition. In September 1953, the Department of Justice determined that prosecution was not warranted for the alleged violations. The file that the FBI created on the temple grew to 3,000 some pages during his lifetime. They never found any evidence of any connection or much sympathy of the temple's members for Japan. So the FBI, CIA, J. Edgar Hoover, and the crew was trying to shut this down. So this is a picture of Sultan Abdul Aziz, one of the last sultans of the Moroccan Empire, one of the last emperors when our empire was intact. Noble Jew Ali met this man. So he was one of the last monarchs in Saudi Arabia. He was the ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from September 23rd, 1932 to 1953. But he started his influence in 1902 as being respected as one of the heads of the empire. All right, so I want to go just read chapter 1. Any questions on the prelude that I read before I just read chapter 1 and close out of the Circle 7 Holy Quran? All right. The genealogy of Yahshua, some people call Jesus, with 18 years of events, life, works, and teachings in India or Hindustan, Europe, and Africa. These events occurred before he was 33 years of age. So the Circle 7 Quran, we're going to be dealing with the brother Yahshua before 33. The King James Bible deals with Yahshua when he's 33. We're dealing with him as a young man. All right, so these events occurred before he was 33 years of age. These secret lessons are for all of those who love Yahshua or Jesus and desire to know about his life, works, and teachings. Dear readers, do not falsify, use these lessons. They are for good, peace, and happiness for all those that love Jesus or Yahshua. Dear mothers, teach these lessons to your little ones, that they may learn to love instead of hate. Dear fathers, by these lessons you can set your household in order, and your children will learn to love instead of hate. The lessons of this pamphlet are not for sale, but for the sake of humanity. As I am a prophet, the servant is worthy of his hire. You can receive this pamphlet at expense. The reason these lessons have not been known is because the Muslims of India, Egypt, and Palestine had these secrets and kept them back from the outside world. And when the time appointed by Allah, they loosened the keys and freed the secrets. And for the first time in the ages, have these secrets been delivered to the hands of the Muslims of America. All authority and rights of publishing of this pamphlet of 1927 by Prophet Noble Jew Ali. The industrious acts of the Muslims of Northwest and Southwest Africa. Remember when we say Northwest, we're already talking about Americas, North, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the islands. We're dealing with Southwest. So Northwest will be North America, Southwest, South America. These are the Moabites, Hamathites, Canaanites, who were driven out of the land of Canaan by Joshua and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in the portion of Egypt. In later years, they formed themselves kingdoms. These kingdoms are called this day Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. That's a little backdrop. I'm gonna read chapter 1 and then close out. Or if anybody got any questions or miscellaneous dialogue or whatnot. So chapter 1, the creation and fall of man. Time never was when man was not. If life of man At any time began, a time would come when it would end. The thoughts of Allah cannot be circumscribed. No finite mind can comprehend things infinite. All finite things are subject to change. All finite things will cease to be because there was a time when they were not. The bodies and the souls of men are finite things, and they will change. Yeah, from the finite point of view, the time will come when they will be no more. But man himself is not the body nor the soul. He is a spirit and a part of Allah. Creative fate gave to spirit man, a soul, that he might function on the plane of soul, gave him a body of the flesh, that he might function on the plane of things made manifest. Why did creative fate give to spirit man a soul, that he might function on the plane of soul? Why did creative fate give the soul of body, the flesh, that he might function on the plane of things that are made manifest? Hear now, ye worlds, dominions, powers, and thrones. Hear now, ye cherubim, ye seraphim, ye angels, ye men. Hear now the platypus, the earth, the plant, the beast. Hear now the creeping things of the earth, the fish that swim, the birds that fly. Hear now, ye the winds that blow, the thunder, the lightnings of the sky. Hear now, ye the spirit, the fire, the water, the earth, the air. Hear now, O everything that is or was or evermore will be. For wisdom speaks from out of the higher plane of spirit. I'm gonna go to something in the chat. We got all peace and love, Brother Gary. All right. Man is a thought of Allah. All thoughts of Allah are infinite. They are not measured up by time. For things that are concerned with time begin and end. The thoughts of Allah are everlasting, of the past until the ever-ending days to come. And so is man, spirit man. But man, like every other thought of Allah, was but a seed that held within itself the potencies of Allah. Just as the seed of any plant of earth holds deep within itself the attributes of every part of that special plant. So spirit man, as seed of Allah, held deep within himself the attributes of every part of God. Now seed are perfect, yeah, as perfect as the source from which they come. But they are not unfolded until life made manifest. The child is as perfect as the mother is. So man, the seed, must be deep planted into a soil that he might grow, unfold, as does the bud unfold to show the flower. The human seed that came forth from the heart of Allah was full ordained to be the Lord of plane of soul and the plane of things made manifest. So Allah, the husbandman, when we look up husbandman as a farmer or a producer of fruit, of everything that is, threw forth his human seed into the soil of soul. It grew apace, and man became a living soul, and he became the Lord of all the kingdom of soul. Hark now, let every creature hear. The plane of soul was but the ether of the spirit plane, vibrating not so fast. And in the slower rhythm of this plane, the essences of life are manifest, the perfumes and the odors, the true sensations, and all the love are manifest. The plane of soul attributes become a body of beauty, a multitude of lessons man must learn upon the plane of soul. And here he tarries many ages until his lessons are learned. Upon the boundary of plane soul, the ether began to vibrate slower still And then the essences took on a final garb. The perfumes and the odors and the true sensations and the all of love were clothed in flesh, and man was clothed in flesh. Perfected man must pass through all the ways of life. And so a carnal nature was full manifest, the nature that sprang forth from fleshly things. Without a foe, a soldier never knows his strength, right? So the flesh is what we wrestle with. That's the whole point of these holy books, is to have a mentality where we can keep our flesh in check, keep our carnal decisions in check, keep our lower self in check. Nothing wrong with the lower self. This must be a balance. So we must have a foe. We must have something that challenges us to see what we're made of. So without a foe, a soldier never knows his strength. And thought must be developed by the exercise of strength. And so this carnal nature soon became a foe that man must fight. And he might be the strength of Allah made manifest. Let every living thing stand still and hear. Man is the Lord of all plane of manifest, of protoplast, of mineral, of plant, of beast. But he gave up his birthrights. Why did he give up his birthrights? Just to gratify his lower self. But man will regain his lost estate, his heritage, but he must do it in a conflict that cannot be told in words. He must suffer trials and temptations, manifold, but let him know that cherubim and seraphim that rule the stations of the sun and spirit of the mighty Allah who rule the solar stars are his protectors and his guides, and they will lead to victory. So it's back to knowing your chart, knowing your tendencies, knowing thyself. Because we might have urges that are stronger than most people. That means we got to tame ourselves, or we got to do certain things, different yoga, breathing exercises, meditation, more than other people may have to do. But you have to know yourself to even gauge that, right? So that's what we're saying. Or if we're saying that, we're saying your sun sign, your moon sign, different planets in your chart, which cause you to act the way you act. As above, so below, right? Man will be fully saved, redeemed, perfected by these things he suffers on the plane of flesh and on the plane of soul. When man has conquered carnal things, his garb of flesh will then have served its purpose well. It will fall, will be no more. As we learn our lessons, right? Then he will stand untrampled on the plane of soul, where he must full complete his victories. Unnumbered foes will stand before man upon the plane of soul. These he must overcome. Yeah, overcome every one. Thus, hope will ever be a beacon light. There is no failure for the human soul, for Allah is leading on, and victory is assured. Man cannot die. The spirit man is one with Allah, and while Allah lives, man cannot die. When man has conquered every foe upon the plane of soul, the seed will have full opened up, have fully opened, will have unfolded into the holy breath. The garb of soul will then have served its purpose well, and man will need it nevermore, and it will pass and be no more, and man will then attain unto the blessedness of perfectedness and be at one with Allah. So that's the whole goal, once we go into these holy books, these are for character purposes, creating that brotherhood, attempting to be in the higher self at all times, right? Creating that humbleness, killing off the ego. This is what the holy books are about. So I just wanted to read chapter 1. We'll continue with chapter 2 next week. I'm going to open the floor just for any dialogue, thoughts, comments, how people feel about what they heard today. Was it insightful? Anything of the above? All right. You got something, Brother Rocky?
Yeah, what were you reading from? Was that the Quran? Or I'm sorry, I probably missed it, but I liked it.
Oh,
But
okay.
where was the expert from?
Yeah, that's the Circle 7, Holy Quran.
Okay.
Yeah, you can order it on Amazon. I'll send you a link, matter of fact. If you,
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Yeah, I like that first chapter.
anybody that doesn't have a Quran, just let me know, and we'll figure out how to make sure you get one. Yeah. Any other questions, statements, comments? Let me see. Look at the chat right here.
I was gonna say, like, man, that's good stuff that you dropped on us. It was real dense stuff, but real good stuff though.
Sure, man. I appreciate it, man. I recorded this too, so I'll send everybody the YouTube link if they want to go over it again. I rewind it. Everybody in here pretty much has the book, so everybody just finished that up. And once again, the whole goal is we want, even if it's just the 7 people that attended today, we want to stay solid with dues. We want to stay solid and continuously getting competent on information. I know we can't all digest this information in one Sunday, but you want to get to a point where we can explain this to our people and bring them to join the organization. We want to figure out, especially Rocky, Sizilla, figure out what your Morris title, what you want your appellation to be. Come up, put a Bay or L at the end of that. I'll send you where to send the dues at, Brother Rocky. And we ultimately want to get our national headdresses, our fezzes, and our turbans. We want to get our flags. These signs and symbols are things that we want to have on our person, or traveling in our conveyances and stuff like that, because all that is status. You don't want to be looked at as a minority or any shape, form, or fashion. But this is what we're trying to do. Once again, the temple was a dojo. This is where we train, get competent on different concepts, holy books, law, history. Like I say, saving money for business purposes. And like I say, waking people up. So friends and family, stay on them. Anybody that got potential, just invite them. Invite them to one of the Sunday meetings. I'm waiting on my publishing company, or not it's a Morrison publishing company that I work with. I'm waiting to get a more influx of books. So any friends and family that you can also just have them get the book, read it, so they can know what they're dealing with before they want to join or whatnot. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do, expansion. Any other questions, statements, comments? All right, well, if that's the case, I'm going to close out. And everybody have, you know what? I'm going to close out with a prayer. Allah, the Father of the universe, the Father of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Allah is my protector, my guide, my salvation by night and by day. Through his prophet, Noble Jew Ali. Amen. And I'm going to close it out on that note. I'll see everybody on Sunday at 11. But of course, everybody, tap in with me throughout the week. We could chit chat, talk on an individual basis. Everybody should have my number or my Instagram information. So just feel free to reach out. We brothers and sisters, and we can talk about whatever. But on that note, peace and love, and everybody have a beautiful rest of their Sunday. And Islam.
Peace. Thank you, everyone.
Islam.